Alright, hi guys. Welcome to what's going to be the second to last lecture of the course. This is actually going to be the final full lecture. I'm going to do another lecture after this, just briefly talking about Vietnam, because I want to get through the ideas and two, just kind of set up the chaos of the 1960s. I apologize. Hopefully, with the images, it won't be too dry, but most of what we're going to do, because I know it's, the end of the semester, we're all tired, it's dead week for a reason. I'll try to keep this lecture brief. I just really want to focus on civil rights. I mean, there's a couple of other things in there I think you should be aware of, but civil rights are pretty much the big thing. Because what we're going to see in the 1940s, 1950s is two competing things. We're seeing this rise of advocacy. Okay, this idea, again, World War II, that, how can we fight against the Nazis and not fix our own problems at home? How do we fight against the Nazis and, still treat African Americans like second class citizens? We're going to see women who in the 1940s, the idea of Rosie the Riveter, who, the idea that women can build tanks, but men wanted women out of those jobs. They wanted those jobs for themselves. So we see, those kinds of issues. And so what we're going to see is at the same time you have this new sense of advocacy and reform, we create this idea of the post-war consensus. And this is a development of the Cold War. The idea that if anything wants to challenge the status quo, they must be communist. That's communist subversion trying to undo the United States from within. So at the same time as we're wanting to change, we're wanting to keep stuff the same. Now, while that's going on, there's no sense of chaos like after World War I. There's no economic, stuff. It's another boom time. It's treated almost like another roaring 20s, yet another golden age for the United States. And so people want to enjoy life, they want to be happy. And we're going to see the rise of boom towns, the rise of just these new huge cities that pop up almost overnight. Although I know that nobody watched the videos because I was once a student, and why would I do anything of the sort? I hope you did at least watch some of the 1957 film Crisis at Levittown. This is Levittown, Pennsylvania right here. And this is indicative of those new suburban communities that sprawled up all across the United States. And what we're going to see is American society changes in the 50s. Okay, you're going to see a baby boom at the end of World War II. Why? What's the first thing every serviceman's going to want to do as soon as he gets back home? And apparently you don't have time to stop at the gas station. Quite literally, between 1950 and 1960, the United States has a 19% increase in population. That is astronomical. Okay, that would be the case of, I'm going to do math and bear with me. You got, let's say we have 100 million people. Then by the end of the decade, you have 120 million people. Actually, by around 1963, if you remember, we have around 189 million people. I'm going to use my handy-dandy thing because I just decided to do math, and we all know how bad my math skills are. But if I could type the right numbers, I'm an idiot. Divided, but remember, if any of you, by the way, want to be a history major, or actually, if you do good in this class, I apologize. It means you're going to suck at math. I mean, literally, the math centers of our brain are damaged. And I'm in charge of your grades. That's what's even funnier. Okay, so 189 divided by 0.19. Well, that didn't work. You know what? Never mind. I don't even want to try to guess what the population was in 1950. To hell with it. But understand, it is a huge, 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 huge increase. Cities are going to grow. Wages are going to increase. Families, when I say grew bigger, what I meant is you could now financially support more children. But at the same time, it's this competing that you could support more children, but the kids were living longer. We also see the transition of families to the modern aspect of the nuclear family. Okay, the nuclear family is the idea of, it would be you, your spouse, and your kids. That's it. As opposed to in the 1920s, it might have been you, your spouse, your kids, both sets of parents, and maybe even, a grandparent or two. And I'm just thinking, good God, that would be horrible because living with my mother, I would shoot myself. Or not my mother, but my mother-in-law. My mother I might want to as well because I love my mom, but never mind the fact I have a PhD and a real big boy job and all that. she still assumes I'm 5, which is even more embarrassing when she, tries to tell me what to do in front of my wife, and it's just like, apparently, by the way, being like, Mom, I have a PhD. Well, you still don't know how to tie your shoes. I don't see how that's relevant, but whatever. But it's this idea now, instead of these huge families, we go to these smaller nuclear families. Families are getting bigger, but infant mortality is going down. So you can, you don't have to have as many kids because you hope that, 3/4 of them live, but now you have more kids because you can support it. We're going to see an increase in appliances, more ways to make life easier. Everybody has electricity. Thank you, New Deal. So now televisions become, the thing. And just think about it. Today, $380, you'll get your own 16-inch black and white TV and combination record player. And there's still nothing on. It's this whole idea. And by the way, in the 1950s, when you got a television set, today it's like, whatever, I get a TV, big deal. In the 1950s, okay, hang on just a second. There we go. In the 1950s, getting a television was a huge thing. It was not uncommon, and they would put out movies showcasing this. It was not uncommon that if you got a TV, which, by the way, these things, as you can tell, are huge, okay, the delivery guy would wheel it up. You would invite all of your neighbors. You'd make a lot of food, finger food sandwiches, and you would more or less throw a neighborhood block party. Getting a television in the 1950s was as much a status symbol as it was convenience. I mean, now, families have what? I mean, my wife and I, we've got 2 TVs, one in our game room, one in our living room. I'm sure it's the same with you guys, well, one in the dorm room. But, you have access to multiple TVs. Or, you might have a TV and a monitor, or, a desktop and a notebook. I mean, redundancy. But here, getting a TV was a status symbol. And the television, by the way, is going to be instrumental in the civil rights movement. It's one thing to read about somebody, a race riot. It's one thing to read that people are being denied the use of vote. It's one thing to read about the KKK and cross burning. It's another to see it happening live. This is what finally changes, the American public's mind and makes them actually do something in order to, do something in order to, change the status quo and to try to seek, reform. I was going to say revolution. I'm like, what the hell am I thinking? Let's not really worry about reform and modernization other than to say, that, the government is trying to do things. We're starting to grapple with the idea of universal health care. We're starting these things like internal improvements that, yes, the government does have the right to build an interstate system. All of this stuff. But the biggest reform and what I want you to be, the most focused on, because it may not seem like it, but one of your essay topics is going to be the Cold War. And with the Cold War, I want you to address the civil rights movement. And the reason is, if we look at that idea of advocacy and, consensus, okay, the consensus had been separate but equal. That, and the idea behind separate but equal, again, going way back to Plessy v. Ferguson, back in 1898 or 1896, was that so long as facilities were equal, they could be separate. But in almost no case were facilities ever equal. You're going to see that water fountains are going to be segregated. You're going to see that theaters are going to be segregated. Drugstores, restaurant counters, waiting rooms. Okay, lynchings are still going to be common. Remember Will Brown, who was murdered in 1919. That is still going to be common. And we see the resistance to this change. When in World War II, we get the Double V campaign by the NAACP. The idea of victory at home, victory abroad. The idea that, look, how can we fight against fascism but let this happen in our own country? How can we say the treatment of Jews as second-class citizens is wrong, but we let it stand for us in our own country? But what we're going to see is, they try to link Jim Crow with fascism. They try to link the American way with freedom. In actuality, in World War II, what we're going to see is that these people who were marching, race discrimination breeds fascism. Stuff like this. We drive tanks, not trolleys. These guys are going to be monitored by the FBI as suspected Nazi agents, as suspected insurgents. Now, I don't know much. I mean, I just have the PhD or whatnot. Actually, all it means is I get 70 grand in student loans. Yay! But it's this idea. If the Nazis believe in blonde, blue-eyed, blonde hair, Aryan, supermen people, which, blonde, blue-eyed, ich bin kein Nazi. But, this idea, why are black people going to work for them? It makes no sense. Nobody in the government stops and asks that logical question because instead it's, again, this idea, don't disrupt the status quo. Keep things how they have always been. And we're going to see that the push to do something about civil rights, it takes a long time. World War II starts the ball rolling. Okay, World War II starts the process of getting people to acknowledge that this is a problem, getting people to acknowledge it's something that has to be addressed. But the fact is, it only happens because African Americans flee the South in World War II. They flee the South, and what happens? They move north to take those factory jobs. So now the North has to deal with its own racism. Again, if you watch that Crisis at Levittown film, those people were Northerners. That is Pennsylvania. And they make it seem like African Americans have come from Mars or something. Segregation is everywhere. People all over are resistant. Truman wants to make civil rights a Democratic Party platform, but he almost gets no headway. All he can really do is in 1948, he can call for desegregation of the United States military. That is all he can do. Now, the Army and the Air Force and the Navy will comply immediately. The Army waits until about 1951, 1952, and the Korean War. By the 1950s, the United States Army, which is a citizen soldier army, is supposed to be representative of the United States as a whole, is more integrated than American society. That's how bad things are in the United States. And what we're going to see is he can only move so fast. Because granted, this is from 1924, yay the yellow Wisconsin progressives, or it's because of cheese, whatever. Look at the blue. I know Oklahoma was a blue state long ago. That's the solid South, okay? They typically voted as one solid voting bloc. But what we're going to see, okay, is the only thing that can change that is when in 1948, after Truman, a Democrat, tries to put civil rights on the party platform, we get the rise of what are called the Dixiecrats. And these are people, their sole thing, their sole issue, they couch it in states' rights, but the sole issue is to prevent integration. The idea that whites and blacks are equal, that whites and blacks can go to school together, that is completely abhorrent to them. We're going to see they're going to carry 4 states plus 1 electoral vote. That is the determination of their resolve. And what's really ironic about these bastards is Strom Thurmond, who was the presidential candidate for the Dixiecrats, had an African-American mistress. He had a daughter by that mistress. So not only is he paying for his, child that he had out of wedlock, but at the same time trying to say, but you cannot go to the same places as me. You cannot go to the same theaters. You cannot even eat lunch at the same lunch counter with me. I do apologize. I do tend to get a little heated. Civil rights. It's kind of funny here. I have to sit on in front of the camera. You should see me in real class. I'm like all over the place, animated. I'm a fat guy. It's also like my exercise for the day, so why not? To put it in perspective, 1948, this newspaper encompasses everything that is wrong with the United States. President Truman wipes out segregation in armed forces, while the other headline, Posse bent on lynching, searches woods for prey. We'll do stuff for the armed forces. We'll do this little, almost safe thing that we can, but we won't go far enough to fix the problems in society at large. And that's the issue. We can only take baby steps. In fact, it takes until 1954 to finally take out the first brick in the wall of segregation in the United States. Because if we look at this map, Okay, segregation in schools. This was the one thing that people could target because if the idea is that children have to be, treated equally, if you segregate, okay, a part of them, that is, how are they going to feel included? How are they going to make the same benefits? Understand, separate but equal, okay? This schoolhouse on the left is from a campus in Virginia. That is a white schoolhouse. But out back on the same campus, that shack, that's where the black students went. This is what separate but equal meant. And in Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, 1954, the basic argument was that segregation was detrimental to children because it automatically conferred a sense of inferiority to African American children. And if we look, here are the states in red. They are, segregation is the law. You cannot integrate in those states. In blue, it's either optional or limited, okay? It's the case of, a school could be integrated if they wanted, or there would be limited segregation. In green, it's forbidden. And in yellow, there was no legislation, so there was no control over it. And so you're going to see a series of lawsuits go all the way up to the Supreme Court. Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka. Here's the spoiler alert for you guys. Damn it. I was going to tell you I was on the test, and I realized that for whatever reason, this is an ID in literally every one of my other classes. I make it an ID in my Cold War class, but I don't think it's an ID for this class. Oops. It's only taken 3 years, and I still haven't changed it. I think it's because it's so iffy whether or not I'm actually going to make it here or not. But Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka. Okay, this is the single most influential court decision in American history, as far as I'm concerned. What happens? A bunch of lawsuits come up together. The Supreme Court, hears them, and in 1954, unanimously rules that segregation is inherently unequal. It is wrong. But then they screw up. They say that schools should be desegregated with all deliberate speed. Now, if I were to tell you that I want you to turn in a term paper and you've got I want you to do it with all deliberate speed, when are you going to do it? Okay, there's a couple of you I know are really good students, and I'd probably have it in 2 days because, you have nothing better to do. There's a few of you in a couple of weeks, but for the many of you, I'm never going to see it. Or, it'll be sometime before the sun explodes, or, you're going to wait till I'm an old guy, and you're going to think I'm Doc Brown or something. You're going to, have the messenger deliver the paper to me in 40 years. He's alive! He's alive! And, sorry. Going on and back to, whatever. I quit. Well, the issue is, all deliberate speed doesn't do anything. So in the South, people will denounce it. Here you're going to get guys, and I'm going to be doing a lot of skipping. I should have rearranged these slides, but I took the slides from my, which I'm not trying to, shameless plug, but in the summer I'm teaching a U.S. history since 1945, and that one's going to be, about a lot more multimedia based because there's so many great, docs and footage and stuff we can do. So I took the images from that, but I put it in my 1,000 level course. So there's a little mismatch. But you're going to get guys like Alabama Senator Walter F. George, who in the Southern Manifesto says that this is government overreach, that the United States government does not have the right to tell anyone whether or not African American children can go to school with white people. These people understand, for them, this is a threat to the Southern way of life. African Americans wanting to go to school together is the threat to their way of life. It's going to get so bad, people are going to protest it. You're going to get people saying, fight Jim Crow, boycott schools. Or over here, race mixing is communism. Stop the race mixing, the march of the Antichrist. You're going to see numbers. God demands segregation. People are terrified. And understand, guys like Martin Luther King are going to be called communists because, the whole idea is you want to, bring up that whole communist boogeyman and maybe these people will stop. But understand, the idea of whites and blacks mixing was scary as hell to these people. It gets so bad, okay, that in 1957, Governor Orville Faubus, when 9 children want to go to Little Rock Central High School in Arkansas, Orville Faubus mobilizes the United States National Guard. Okay, he mobilizes the Arkansas National Guard to, with rifles and bayonets, stop 9 14-year-olds from going to school. I'm emphatically, beating the desk here. It's awesome. Understand, that is how bad these people don't want it. Now, Eisenhower is slow to react, but finally he says, you know what, this is ridiculous. So Eisenhower federalizes the National Guard. He deploys the 101st Airborne Division, the same people that jump into Normandy, think Band of Brothers fame, and it takes paratroopers to escort children to school. Okay, let's be brutally honest here. Okay, how many of you guys watching this video, which I already know is half the class, are only watching this because you feel you have to, but if you could do anything else, you would do anything else but this. School sucks. Okay, I'm sure there's a few of you. That's okay. Understand, these people, it took the Army to escort them to want to go to school. Okay, there's going to be a guy, I hope you remember his name, by the name of James Meredith, who will be shot in 1963. He lives. Why? Because he wants to enroll at Ole Miss. And people are just so adamant that whites and blacks cannot go to university together that he is shot just for trying to enroll. Okay, look at the people on the right, especially, where's my mouse pointer? This crazy lady just yelling this stuff. And it's inward this, inward that. The idea of integration scared the hell out of these people. And if you watch that crisis at Levittown, you're going to see that the reason is because there's a scene there for those of you that didn't watch it. And she said, well, if children play together, they're not going to realize that there's any problem mixing socially. We're doing this for the children. Because if they intermix socially, okay, then the only result is mixed marriages. And how will mixed race children be accepted in society? That is what they're afraid of. So they're literally telling themselves, okay, we have to do this for the children. Okay? Look at American history. If people do something they know is wrong, they're either going to say do it for the troops or do it for the children. Those are the two buzzwords, or the buzz phrases, I should say, that people use to get you to sign on to questionable stuff. So what we're going to see is, what by the way, I'm getting ahead of the story. What's Faubus's reaction to Eisenhower doing this? Governor Faubus closes every school in the state of Arkansas for 2 years. He just says that's it. If the measure of their resolve is that if whites and blacks have to go to school together, ain't nobody going to school. Eventually it takes 2 years because parents relent. Not because of moral objections, but it's because imagine if you have a chid. I don't know what a chid is, but imagine if you had one too. Imagine if you had a kid and you had to put up with that child every minute of every day for 12 months. You didn't get 9 months of respite. And I'm just thinking of my own childhood. My father once told me, don't you have a street to go play in somewhere? I mean, you get tired of it. I asked this in my night class once, and there's one of my students has a newborn child, 2 kids of her own, and 2 stepkids. And I mentioned this, and she just got this panic look like, oh dear Christ, shoot me now. I mean, that's literally the look that she kind of had. Understand, it's, this is kind of how it is. It's this idea that, parents don't want. So the parents say, no, Governor, never mind your objections. Never mind your principles. Open the damn school so we can send our kids. We want our sanity. Break out the wine. We'll drink our problems down. But it's not just him. This relents. Okay, 57 2 years later, 59. But it doesn't stop then. It keeps going. Okay, we're going to start getting the rise of activism. Things like bus boycotts. Okay, I've got 1953, but let's see, 1953. That would be the Baton Rouge bus boycott. Actually, that's the problem with me. The Montgomery one's actually in 1955. And with that, we get Rosa Parks, who refused to, give up her seat for a white guy. And what we're going to see is, in this case, again, when you can see this unfold, when you can watch it on TV, it changes people's mind. And with the bus boycott, okay, it hits people in their pocket. One of the reasons the bus boycott finally works for, the the NAACP is because people realize that this was their consumer base. If you piss off your consumer base because you are a racist SOB, okay, they're going to vote with their wallets, and that hurts you. And I don't know why my nose is suddenly really itching. It feels like I have a hair just tickling. I don't want to sneeze and then you just, snot all over the camera. That'd be nasty. Now, if they break it, because they're going to use things like carpools. Understand this. What will Alabama do? They're going to break up the protest. They're going to invoke old conspiracy laws to try to break up carpools. They will literally try to say that carpools are illegal. They will try to, by law, make you take the bus. Finally, the bus system itself says, fine, we will comply. And then the Supreme Court says, look, bus seating laws are unconstitutional. You cannot tell passenger A to give up a seat for passenger B. Now, why the bus boycott is so influential is it leads to the emergence of Martin Luther King. With Martin Luther King, understand the civil rights movement is never unified, okay? It's never, one big movement. But he is probably the most well-known, the most vocal, the most vocal, most well-known leader. And so what we're going to see is with Brown v. Board, with Little Rock 9, this whole idea of all through society, they want to combat segregation. So it starts off with, protests and stuff like this. Again, boycotts, things like that. Then we're going to get sit-ins, we're going to get strikes, all of this sort of stuff. And against that backdrop, we're going to get the rebirth of the KKK. Things where they try to pass it off. Well, Southern whites are the Negroes' best friends, but no integration. This idea that you can live, what is it the guy from Christ 11 Town said? Well, they're good Americans. They're just as good as I am. They've got a God-given right to the civil rights. But, and there's always that, but no offense, if you have to say a person has the same rights as you, but you're an asshole. I mean, that's just how it is. And I mean, I'm sure many of you guys had that thought, okay? I'm sure many of you guys, and I apologize if I offended somebody. I realize I probably shouldn't have said that. I really get impassioned with this. And I don't have, you guys aren't here, so I don't have the crowd to, I can't work the crowd. But if you have to tell somebody you have the same rights as me, but you're automatically saying, no, you don't. And I don't want to come down pro or against gay rights, because that's a thorny issue, and I don't really want to get political. But what I would do is just urge this. What we're going to see is a lot of the same rhetoric that people were using against integration is the same thing people are using against gay marriage, okay? Now, if you're for or against gay marriage, that's fine. I mean, I'm not going to lie. Oh God, I'm gonna say this because my wife isn't here, but I'm gonna quote my father. If they want to be as miserable as the rest of us, let them. Why not? But on the other, hand, I don't think that if you don't believe in it, so long as you're not an a-hole about it, I don't think that makes you a bigot. That's my personal thing. I think you're entitled. If I'm not gonna tell person A that they have the right to do this, while telling person B they don't have the right to be upset about it. Okay? For me, the idea, rights cut both ways. If I don't want, what is it I like to tell people? Now my big issue is, I'm a gun owner, okay? I don't want you to tell me, what kind of guns I can have. I don't think that's your right. The same instance, I don't think that I have the right to tell you whether or not you can get married. If you want to, that's your business, not mine. Why I'm getting, and I realize we're getting too far afield here, is because here, it's again that Southern Negroes, or Southern whites, are the Negroes' best friends, but no integration. They want to, the KKK tried to sell themselves as if they these guys are those old patriarchs from the old South. We're going to get that like this, which is a 1948 KKK publicity stunt, which is 50 Shades of effed up, where the KKK and a KKK Santa gave a radio to 2 former black slaves that were still alive. What? Why? I have no idea what to make of this really, but that's what, they're trying to do. And so what we're going to see is with the KKK, they're going to style themselves again, best friends, but yet terrorism, cross burnings, political office, all this stuff. We're going to see a wave of assassinations. I really wish we could get into all of it. But I want to style the course more as political. Well, foreign policy political, I guess I should say. But, understand, guys like Medgar Evers are going to be, assassinated simply because they spoke out. The KKK are going to bomb Martin Luther King Jr.'s house. In Birmingham, the 16th Street Baptist Church is going to be bombed by the KKK in I believe it's 63, killing 4 young girls, all younger than I think 14. I mean, this is a wave of violence. And so understand, people felt really strongly about whatever they wanted. And, African Americans are fighting for the same rights that you and I today take for granted. Okay, the stuff that we have today, I mean, things like going to school, voting, getting a burger at the same counter in Brahms, all that. People were literally fighting and dying to achieve those rights. Now, I was going to talk about Kennedy's New Frontier, but I want to keep this a bit focused. So let's not worry about too much of this slide. But one thing with Kennedy to understand, and Kennedy, by the way, is going to be he's the first president born in the 20th century. He wants to create all sorts of new reforms. He's going to try to put civil rights on the party ticket. He will get it voted in, championing civil rights. But as soon as he gets in office, he has to scale that back to try to stay in office. Also, unfortunately, he is the last fatal victim of the 0-year curse. He's elected in 1960 and assassinated in 1963. Now, with Kennedy, he had promised to desegregate the South, but he really can't do it because you don't want to alienate the Southerns, the solid South, that Southern Democratic voting bloc. So as soon as he gets in office, he starts to downplay it. He's going to do things like bring more voting rights lawsuits, because quite literally, this is the era, by the way, of the literacy test, which I attached. I hope you at least took a look at it. But with the idea of the literacy test, you would, if you wanted to vote, okay, you go to the place and you would have to take this test. And what the test basically is, it is a government test over the Constitution. Now, you don't get a copy of the Constitution because as a loyal American, you should already know it. It's designed for you to fail. You get 10 minutes, 67 questions, you get 7 wrong, you failed, and you thought my tests were bad. That's it. But if a white person failed, well, did your grandfather vote? Yes, sir. Congratulations, here's your ballot. The grandfather clause let white people continue to vote. So Kennedy starts trying to bring more voting rights lawsuits, but he doesn't let the FBI protect demonstrators. So what happened? Let's take Selma in 1965. Voting rights drive. Alabama state troopers and Selma PD beat the holy hell out of these guys. Why? Because they're trying to, they're just trying to register to vote. He'll do things like he'll create a presidential commission on equal employment. And something trying to say, okay, well, are you, being discriminatory? Are you hiring an appropriate number of whites and blacks? But it's just voluntary. There's no teeth in the legislation. I mean, every time I think of this, I think of Hans Blix from Team America. What are you going to do? Well, we're going to write you a letter telling you how very angry we are. Kennedy doesn't want to act. And here's the thing about Kennedy, and I hate saying this, but he does more by being shot by Lee Harvey Oswald for civil rights than he does in office. Now, if that seems a little too much, I'm sorry if I offend, but consider this. After he's dead, that lets Johnson then pass legislation saying Kennedy would have wanted this. We're doing this in Kennedy's name. Kennedy becomes a martyr that lets this stuff get done. Kind of like with the space race, which I wish we could have talked about. Can we go to the moon? Well, it's going to be damn some hard. Kennedy's dead? Okay, well, now we have to go to the moon because Kennedy wanted us to. So along with that, as my special... Wait a minute, I think I did... Did I... I did my Mayor Quimby voice, I think. So, why not? I'm going to do it again anyway, just because you guys need to laugh. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade. We choose to go to the moon and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Now excuse me, I've got a day from Marilyn Monroe and in Springfield. Okay, gotta break it up. You can use the idea of Kennedy's name to inspire people, and that's what happens. Martin Luther King, okay, and bear in mind, with Martin Luther King, he is probably the most, the crucial leader of the civil rights movement, in my opinion. Now, with him, he doesn't want violence. He doesn't want race riots. He doesn't want violence. Instead, civil disobedience. You break the law, you submit to arrest, and in doing so, you show how bad the law is. In fact, that's what's going to work really well. If the cops beat the snot out of you and you did nothing to provoke it, and people see it, that's how you make change. So we're going to see things like the Freedom Rides, which the Freedom Rides, what those were, if the United States government barred segregation, okay, then things crossing interstate lines would come under the purview of the federal government. So, interstate bus terminals, even in the South, must be desegregated. So, people, whites and blacks in the North would ride these buses, the bus system down, to go to these terminals to prove a point. Many are going to be attacked, demonstrators are going to be beaten, buses are going to be firebombed, civil rights advocates are going to be shot, and we're going to see that in the early 1960s, it's almost like chaos. And we're going to see that especially, and this is before his I Have a Dream speech in August, okay? Just a lot of stuff break out. I put this slide in out of order, by the way. This is George Wallace, quote-unquote, standing at the schoolhouse door at the University of Alabama, where he himself vowed to bar any African American who wanted to enroll in the university. This is the American society. And consider this. This is only, this is only 52 years ago. Okay, this is in the life of, your parents, okay? This is not that far ago. But in 1963, in May, King is arrested and he starts this huge voting campaign. And there's going to be numbers of protests. And they're peaceful. And the Birmingham Police Department completely overreacts. Okay? Bear in mind, this is the Cold War era. We're telling the rest of the world the Soviet Union are the bad guys. We are the good guys. We are the beacon of freedom. And look what we're doing to American citizens. German shepherds, attack dogs, attacking this African-American guy for no reason. Or here, peaceful demonstrators hit and pushed to the ground with high-power water hoses. I mean, if you can see this picture left, look how much it's just pushing him in. These things freaking hurt. And all this is done under the auspices of Public Safety Commissioner Bull Connor. And I hope you watch at least the first about 30 seconds of that segregation at all costs video that I posted. Because Bull Connor, after this, wasn't remorseful. He didn't say we made a mistake. He didn't resign. He gets voted in again. And his attitude is, I whipped these birds back in Birmingham. I'm trying to do my best voice now. But his whole thing, you gotta keep your white and the black separate. And I mean, he just gets really pissed off sounding. He doesn't see he did anything wrong. In the South, there is massive, did I mention massive, resistance to all of this stuff. And so people see that unfold on national TV. There are cameras all over the world. People see it. And now people in the North get horrified. Even some in the South who told themselves it wasn't that bad, it's not that bad, it can't happen here. They see it. And it causes a push for a change. Kennedy finally has to start to act. And we see that when in August 1963, we're going to see Martin Luther King, his I Have a Dream speech, 200,000 marchers in favor of desegregation in Washington, D.C. Kennedy promises all sorts of new legislation, but Kennedy is cut down by Lee Harvey Oswald in November 1963. And it falls to, if I get there eventually, Lyndon Baines Johnson. Now, Johnson's an idealist. He is the last true progressive American president. He wants to extend the New Deal. He wants to extend the stuff that Woodrow Wilson and Theodore Roosevelt had wanted to do. He wants things like a war on poverty. He's also an SOB. He would literally browbeat you, yell at you, cuss you, tear you down until you agreed to do whatever he wanted. I think I have friends like that. He's even going to be able to have an uneasy alliance with guys like Martin Luther King. He's going to push for civil rights and try to get all of this stuff, working. But the issue with Johnson, he's also the masterful politician. He has no problem using Kennedy's name. And so within civil rights, he wants to include that in a larger domestic program called the Great Society. His attitude was literally, why can American society not be great for all Americans? Why can't we make this just a great society for everyone? But here is his problem. Okay, the Great Society might have been good. It might have worked wonderfully. But just as he's getting started, we get embroiled in Vietnam, which is going to be the subject for the next lecture. But real quick, I want to talk about the Great Society and things like that. Because with the Great Society, its biggest successes are going to be the expansion of Medicare, the expansion of Medicaid, the idea of helping the poor. Things like the Civil Rights Act of 1964, where finally we have legal government protections for African Americans. He's going to do things like he literally is a liberal, but he wants to lower taxes. I know the 1960s are weird. I mean, come on, it is the 60s. I mean, think about this. Scooby-Doo and Shaggy. Okay, Shaggy, bell bottoms, overgrown, shaggy hair, always has the munchies, and his dog talks. The dude is high. Okay, just saying. But what we're going to see is, his biggest thing are going to be things like the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And, the Voting Rights Act, we'll talk about that in a second, but it abolishes those literacy tests. His whole thing is Johnson had grown up poor. He wants to help the poor. He wants to create a federal jobs program. Let's do things like actually make the government help people get jobs. Do things to help each other. Do things to do better. Again, if the New Deal creates the idea that the government has to help you, the New Deal creates the idea where the government should be there for the average American citizen, then the Great Society is to actually put that hardcore into practice. Now, here's the thing. The Great Society is ultimately a failure. Why? And this isn't me being conservative. It's a failure because we go into Vietnam. And Johnson does not have the political capital to both, doesn't have the political capital to, execute domestic policy and foreign policy. Now, what we're going to see is with the Civil Rights Act, we get the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. No longer can you take a stack of job applications from African Americans and throw them in the trash can. If they are qualified, you have to give them a job. Okay? Now, this is so unpopular that people at the time say, well, wait a minute. Let's throw in discriminate based on race and sex. If we do that, okay, again, and I hope you watch the Leave It to Beaver thing because that's going to help underscore their thinking. No one in their right mind would dare say that we can't discriminate against women. But Congress passes it anyway. This is what creates, and I really, really wish we could have gotten to it in this class. If you want to know more, please, please, please take my U.S. since 1945 class I'm doing over the summer. But this is what launches second wave feminism, because now there is a legal framework where the government says, look, you cannot discriminate against women. We're not quite there, the government saying women have equal rights, but we're getting there. Okay. 1965, we're going to get things such as, and this is what leads to the Voting Rights Act, because there's an attempt for a voter registration drive. And this is what I mentioned with Selma. And again, captured on, TV, tear gassing, cops beating protesters and marchers. Why? Because they want the right to vote. They don't want to do literacy tests. They don't want to pay poll taxes. They just want to be able to vote for president. And they see these people get beat up, especially things like Bloody Sunday, which March 7, 1963, or 65. This is Bloody Sunday. Okay? People just beaten. There's going to be a white minister, James Reeb, who comes in from the north. He's viewed as a race traitor, so he is shot and killed. And so this forces Johnson's hand. Johnson sends in the National Guard troops. He then protects the protesters for the first time. And we get the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Literacy tests are banned. Federal registrators are going to be sent to the South to try to get people to vote. By the end of the decade, 65% more African Americans are going to vote, which is good, but nowhere near enough. Because if you only have, in a community with 10,000 eligible voters, okay, and 100 were voting, a 65% increase means 165 are now voting. It's still well short of where it needs to be. Understand, this takes time. All we're going to get to in this course is the seeds of change. We don't actually get to all of the change. And part of why is, if that's in 65, we need to, unfortunately, jump back to August of 1964. Because the United States, both with civil rights and all that, is on the verge of something akin to a societal and cultural revolution. Because on August the 2nd, 1964, North Vietnamese torpedo boats attacked the American destroyer USS Maddox in the Gulf of Tonkin off the coast of Vietnam. Now, this kind of creates the desire for American intervention. Now, remember, and we've talked about it before, but remember, French lose Indochina. We then stop, those elections. 1962. We create the military, it should be military, I've never fixed it, I don't know why, the Military Assistance Command Vietnam. We give aid, advisors, and guns to South Vietnam. Now, South Vietnam, it's fighting that guerrilla war with the North. It's 7 governments in 1 year. I mean, quite literally, a guy comes in, deposed, comes in, assassinated, comes in, deposed, just do. By the end, we're supporting a guy called Ngo Dinh Diem. And this guy is a dictator by any stretch of the imagination. To put it in perspective how much of an a-hole this guy is, and especially his wife, in the early 60s, Buddhist monks, one of the preferred things was self-immolation. That to protest his government, they would go out in the middle of a street in Saigon and light themselves on fire. After one that had shocked the world, his wife said, well, I hope that they would do us the kind favor of letting us know the next time they're going to do it. That way we can bring the marshmallows. That's the kind of government the United States is backing. Then on August the 2nd, this torpedo boat attacks. Then the government wants to use this as a pretext to, get involved. It's a little flimsy. So they invent a fabricated attack on August the 4th. When we hear of the Gulf of Tonkin attacks or Gulf of Tonkin incidents, there were 2. One was real, one was made up by the United States government. With Vietnam, we're going to get into what's called the credibility gap. And I wish we could talk about it. I really wish we could. Unfortunately, all I'm going to be able to do is just end the course in chaos, right? I mean, why not? Chaos is fun. We'll end on a happy note, but understand, the next lecture, which is only going to be like 20, 30 minutes, we are going to talk about a lot of chaos. So in August, we passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. And what this says is that the president can, at his discretion, without the consent of Congress, do whatever he needs to do in order to protect American interests in South Vietnam and Southeast Asia. What that means is he can send troops, he can begin airstrikes, he can get the United States into war without a formal declaration of war. Now, initially, this is stupid popular. People love this. We're containing communism. We're being America. Team America. Gay men. We're excited about it. But that's going to change within 2 years. The war will stalemate by 1967. And this is going to dominate American politics all the way to 1973. And in fact, in some cases, it's still there with us today. Because, think when we invaded Iraq back in 2003, fears that it would, as it did, turn into another Vietnam. And this is going to lead, this coupled with, the counterculture movement, coupled with civil rights, coupled with, just people coming of age, coupled with, new recreational drugs, all this stuff is going to create a social revolution that by 1968, there are some people actually afraid that Western civilization is on the brink of collapse. And with that happy note, we'll call it good for this one. I will upload another lecture fairly soon after this one, and then that will wrap up the course. So with that one, take it easy, have a good one, and I will see you in the next lecture. Bye-bye.